5 more players to preview, to dissect, to talk about, to ask our same questions about Key, JC, Svi, and Filipowski. We're going with the E theme tonight. We've delved into 10 Utah Jazz players of the 15 on standard NBA contracts, which means we have 5 more guys to pick apart in this preview series of the Salt City Hoops podcast. I'm Dan Clayton, part of Salt City Hoops. Mark Russell Pereira is part of Salt City Hoops. Mark, how the heck are you? The Niners won, and the Jazz won a meaningless and ugly preseason game. So it's got to be a good night in the Pereira household.
Look, if you're watching on YouTube, which if you're not, I encourage you to take a look at that, see our facial expressions as we talk about some of our exciting young guys, perhaps. But I realized the last 2 player preview podcasts we've done have been wearing a gray sweatshirt, and tonight we had the Niners on, so I got my favorite shawl-collared Niners sweater on. It's my favorite piece of clothing I own because I loathe wearing jerseys. Unlike other adults who look down on other adults for wearing jerseys. I don't care what you wear. If you're wearing a Jazz jersey to the arena, I personally don't like it. I love wearing like sweaters and cool retro stuff. And also, I'm a huge beer guy. And it's Great American Beer Festival this week. I got myself my favorite beer I've ever had in my entire life in my hands right now. I got a Four Noses Pump Action. It's a 7.5% pumpkin ale from a local beer brewery here in Colorado. Dan, yeah, the meaningless Jazz game, though, was on my primary TV. That's what I care about the most, honestly. I'm not even kidding. Because unlike our 2 prior podcasts, we've had a couple preseason games that might influence some of our discussion today about the remaining 5 players, and I'm really excited to talk about them.
Yeah, me too. With my Diet Coke in my hand. Just so our listeners know, we're good with whatever.
Look. Some of us are built for the Thursday night 7.5 beer, and some of us are getting back from a long day of work, and some of us do both.
There you go. So you mentioned preseason action. One of the players that we were set to talk about today had a little preseason mishap tonight. Let's start there. Let's start with Keyonte George. He was going to be first on our list anyway. For those of you who have been with us through this little mini series of podcasts, we've kind of tried to spread out the more interesting players and go kind of, 2-3 really interesting guys per podcast episode, and then rush through the Patty Millses of the world and whoever else. So we saved Keyonte George for last, and actually he's the only guy we're going to discuss today from among those 6 recent first-round picks. Filipowski, obviously, borderline first-rounder. But he is the only guy left we haven't talked about out of, him, Cody Williams, Taylor Hendricks, Walker Kessler, etc., Sensabaugh, Collier. And tonight fell backwards on a 3-point attempt into some chairs, made some drinks spill. They cleaned that out, but looked like he was going to be okay. And then on the very next play, kind of tried to do a crossover, and his feet just went out from under him. The word they're saying is mild knee sprain. It looked like the left knee. When he first fell, he grabbed his right ankle, and then immediately after that grabbed his left knee. So mild knee sprain, I assume we're talking about his left knee, just judging from where his hands went.
Well, and just building on that real quick is, as a fan, you kind of read the reaction of players real quick, and he immediately put his head in his hands. And this isn't a guy with a long injury history. It's not like he knew something horrible happened, but he immediately knew something was very wrong and immediately put his head in his hands. And as a fan, you're like, it's over. It's done. This is it. So already having a report that, like, okay, based on the way his knee's moving and everything, like, it's a knee sprain, move on. So, wow, my heart stopped, Dan.
The 2024-2025 Jazz, I continue to insist that I think they're going to be interesting for a lot of reasons, but not for the usual reasons that it's interesting to casual people to follow a basketball team. If suddenly you had to imagine, Isaiah Collier starting at the 1 for 82 games. I think that, and I'm a Collier guy. We've talked about Collier already. I think Collier has a chance in the long term to be maybe a better pure point guard, even though, Keyonte is a different kind of guard. But I just think not having Keyonte would instantly sap so much of the interest level out of this season. I think a lot of the reason this season is going to have mattered in 2 or 3 years is because you're going to start to see the interplay between Keyonte and Markkanen and Keyonte and Cody Williams and Walker Kessler and some of these other guys who might matter in the long term. And so I'm with you. I'm relieved that it was nothing super serious.
Yeah, and we've talked about Collier. Please give a listen to the prior episodes if you haven't on our thoughts about it. But he's looked cool and good in the preseason games the Jazz have had so far. I don't want to say great, right? There's always going to be some. Look, he's a late first-round pick, rookie point guard, but cool and good is a great start. So, Dan, I love the questions that we have set up for every player, and Keyonte George is going to be my favorite player to ask the question that we start off for all these players. Because I think the upside from what we saw last year as a rookie is enormous, but also there's a significant gray area, which I want to start out by asking you, Dan, what is a great season for Keyonte George this year? And I want you to keep in mind with the tenor of this question that this is not meant to be, okay, what's a good step in the progression for Keyonte George? That is not the question I'm asking. I'm asking you, what is a great season for Keyonte George? What is a season that we walk away being like, oh, wow, right? Whereas Lauri Markkanen's most improved player season, that was a great season, right? Is what world, and I don't want to be fantastical. I don't want to be like, what is something that is preposterously possible, but it's not worthy of talking about. But what is on the table as a potentially great season that we could walk away from Keyonte George's 2024 season thinking this is the future?
I think to me, qualitatively, and we can talk quantitatively too, because I have some thoughts on statistically what should a guy who's going to be the appointed starter from October 23rd on, or whenever he's healthy again on. So we'll talk quantitatively too. Qualitatively, I think the most important thing that Keyonte could do to make the Jazz go, oh, wow, maybe we have two pieces of the future core and not just one, is to look and act and feel more like a showrunner, more like a table setter. I'm not necessarily talking about the number of assists. I'm not talking about any of that. I'm talking about feeling like he is running the team in a way that I haven't felt like a whole lot. Will Hardy talked the other night before the last home game. He talked about trying to get Keyonte to recognize what they're trying to accomplish pace-wise in different situations. The Jazz want to do different things after a make versus after a miss, et cetera. And there are some things like that just come naturally to someone who's more of an instinctual playmaker, table setter, facilitator, whatever you want to call it. I don't care about the ratio of how often he passes it versus keeps it versus pulls up behind the screen and shoots it. I care that there's an obvious sense of oh yeah, this guy knows what he's supposed to do with the basketball in his hands. I haven't always felt that way. I might be slightly lower in general terms than the average Jazz fan. Just because I do think there are times where, he dribbles the ball in one place until the shot clock says 10, 11, or 12. And to me, that's kind of problematic when the whole question, the whole thing that Justin Zanuck and Danny Ainge and Will Hardy are watching about Keyonte's game this year is, can he really succeed and thrive as a lead guard in the NBA? Or is he always going to be a guy who feels like you're trying to, shoehorn him into point guard when really he's something else? So that's my macro answer. I'm happy to go micro too, but I want to get your thoughts on that.
So Keyonte George has continued to stun me every stage of his performance on the court. The very first thing that stunned me was you watched him in March Madness, and look, I'm sitting here on my couch. I've said this for 2 podcasts in a row. I cannot judge somebody's athleticism and conditioning and performance on the couch, but he was kind of a bigger dude, I guess, a little more James Harden shaped. Not quite that level, but like that's how he was looking. And then about a month into the season, look, NBA training camp will do wonders for you. It's perhaps the survivor diet of professional sports. But all of a sudden, we had this 6'4" athlete on this team instead of this, okay, well, we got to kind of mold his body over the next couple years and turn him and get him a few NBA professional off seasons to really train what his body should be. No, we had an athlete immediately. He looked trim. He was fast. He's never going to be like the top tier nuclear athlete or even like a B plus level athlete, right? Where he's not Donovan Mitchell like dunking on people, whatever, even 2 foot, 1 foot, not the kind of player he is. And he has more guile to his game than straight up first step speed, verticality, physicality, whatever you want to call it. But that part was like, oh, there's more to him. And then the entire profile was, well, we got a combo guard, and we're going to kind of see what happens when we put the ball in his hands, right? He's a gunner. He has an incredible penchant for making difficult shots. Okay, Jordan Clarkson Part 2. Seen that game before. No, he's whipping these incredibly cool passes, and as much as we talked about Jordan Clarkson's improvement as a passer and identifying defenses and being more willing to distribute the basketball, no, Keyonte George was doing like professional level pick and roll stuff as a rookie. And what I'm looking for as for like the great season for Keyonte George is capital N nuance. I want every screen set by Walker Kessler, Lauri Markkanen, Kyle Filipowski, John Collins, every time that we have some sort of hard screen, slip screen, Drew Eubanks setting some mashing illegal screen, whatever it is, I want it to be like the defense thinking, Keyonte George can do one of 9 different things, and I can't tell what he's going to do based on his tendencies, based on what he's been able to show, based on what he likes to do, left, right, regardless. I want so much mystery to his pick and roll game. To your point about show running, right? It's a lot of the best playmakers in the NBA have so much mystery to what happens after they do that first step. Donovan Mitchell's one of his greatest skills that he learned from year 1 to year 2 was manipulating the speed of his first step. Colin Sexton's learned this quite a bit actually recently. But it's okay, if you're an athlete playmaker, if you're a more one of our top tier athletic showrunners, how can you manipulate your speed instead of just go fast, go fast, go fast? And Keyonte George has so much guile and shot making to him where that difficult shot making can be part of his nuanced show running where I really don't know when this dude is going to pull up going left or right, and oh, by the way, he might take 1 dribble, he might take 5 dribbles. There's so much more nuance I want him to explore. And yeah, we can get into statistics and assists and turnovers and whatever. I don't care if this dude averages 4.5 turnovers a game. Maybe that's a little bit too much. But there is so much that I want him to explore in different circumstances. Not just top of the arc pick and roll. Like, what happens if he happens to be on the second side where he gets something where he has to do some sort of guard action because the play is broken down, there's 8 seconds left in the clock, and yeah, he's okay doing this isolation basketball, make a tough shot, but identifying, to your point about Will Hardy, indicating that we need him to learn kind of where the situation is, if there's 8 seconds left on the clock and he's got a great defender on him, there's enough time to do something weird and unusual and nuanced about that show running and that playmaking. And that's what I want to leave this season saying, like, that's a great season because this guy can do anything. And the last thing I'll say about what a great season looks like for me, Deron Williams came into the NBA, not the same kind of like, okay, he's a difficult shot maker kind of gunner type, but we didn't see Deron Williams coming into the NBA as a 10 assists per game uh, perennial all-star. That wasn't what we were expecting. We were expecting when we traded up for him and drafted him. Like, look, we want all-star out of him. We want a couple all-star games. But this sort of like Carlos Boozer, Darren Williams, like, okay, this guy is a pick-and-roll maestro under the Jerry Sloan offense. The next iteration of what John Stockton would be in this era of Jazz basketball, I can't say we never saw it coming, but that wasn't what the expectation was. And Keyonte George has blown away my expectations of what he could be. And so while he may not become a 10 assist per game guy, and I don't want to put him into a box and say, please be John Stockton, Keyonte George, I really want that to happen. I am so excited to learn new things about Keyonte George. And that would be part of a great season for me, is there's new things to him. He's still exploring. He's still learning. So a lot of weird qualitative things to that. There's some stats we can probably say about like what would mean success, maybe assist to turnover ratio or whatever. I mean, you are a great stats person. I can't wait to see what you're going to lay down with this.
Well, but again, I mean, I'm with you that like it's not about like go pretend to be John Stockton. Again, I'm talking about just kind of a level of like what you're talking about, kind of pick and roll mastery and being able to pick apart defenses that like sometimes you're going to do that. And the right decision at the end of the play is still going to be to pull up and shoot. And actually, I think one of the stats that's going to be really important for Keyonte, and he's off to a great start in the preseason, is pull up shooting. Like he was over 35% on pull up threes for most of last season. It dipped a little at the end, and I think he wound up at 34 point something on pull ups specifically. That's an important stat. I want him to take that shot. I want him to, drive to the nail and pull up occasionally. I want him to get all the way to the rim when that's what the defense is allowed. Like Cade Cunningham is thought of as this like pick and roll surgeon type guy, and he only averages like 6 or 7 assists. I'm not asking Keyonte to become Steve Nash or anything like that. I just I want to see him be a little bit more in command of the offense. And that's all I mean when I say, like, look, anytime any 2 or more smart people sit down to talk about NBA player projections, we're always talking in a probabilistic way, right? In other words, if you're talking to someone who says Keyonte George is definitely going to be an all-star level lead guard in the NBA, or Keyonte George is definitely not going to be that, you're probably talking to someone who's not that smart, right? It's always about like, what are the chances of a player getting to this point in his best case scenario, fulfilling 80% of his ceiling, 60% of his ceiling, whatever. And all I'm saying is I think that the average Jazz fan would say that Keyonte George has a 60% chance of making an all-star team someday, and I think he has a 35% chance of making an all-star team someday as a lead ball handler in the NBA, because guess what? That's a really effing hard thing to do.
That's still a high percentage. A 1 in 3 chance that a late lottery or a post-lottery guy is an all-star? Sign me up, Dan.
I mean, honestly, he might just be, he might just be middle-class man's Anthony Simons. You know what I mean? And Anthony Simons has never made an all-star team either. So anyway, that's all I'm saying is like, I think to have like a head-turning season that makes us think differently about roster construction moving forward and go, oh, now it's not just about putting 2 or 3 guys around Lowry. It's about what would complement the Lowry-Keyonte vibe. It would be a season that makes you start to think of him as a real kind of offensive engineer, the way we think of Cade Cunningham, the way we think of, I'm not going to, like, it's ridiculous to say, like, go be Chris Paul, only like this era's best sort of offensive architect at the point. But you know what I mean? Like, get closer to that side of the spectrum where you're not just coming off the pick and making like an A or B read. You're like manipulating the defense. You're anticipating helps. You're drawing things. Isaiah Collier had a play tonight. We're recording this in the night of the 3rd preseason game for those who are listening later. Isaiah Collier had a play tonight where he starts to drive and he notices that John Collins is coming from the weak side and has a beat on his man. And Collier had space to get all the way to the rim, but he did something really cool. He kind of changes speed at the free throw line and veers left to go kind of across the paint instead of towards the bucket. And the reason he did that is because by doing that, he keeps his guy from getting deep enough to be in John Collins' way. And because of that, John Collins is able to slip behind his man and get all the way to the hoop. And Isaiah feeds him a perfect pass, and John Collins goes up and makes the layup, even though his guy was like, oh shit, and grabbing him from the back of the jersey to try to prevent that.
One of the strangest fouls I've seen. I've never seen somebody just like grab a jersey out of desperation.
Yeah, it was just like an oops thing. So that's what I'm talking about. Like the fact that Isaiah Collier at game speed could go, oh yeah, I don't want to drive to the lane because I'm going to make it harder for John Collins to finish this play. I'm going to go this way instead, is kind of what I'm talking about. And like I said, for Collier, it's so instinctual. Now Collier might or might not make it, as a long-term NBA player for other, for his own reasons. But like, that's the kind of thing that I would just like to see Keyonte George. I guess all I'm doing is I'm taking a really long way of saying what you said. It's all about nuance. It's all about nuance. You're way smarter than me. I just should have shut up after you said nuance.
Buddy, this is what happens when you're drinking a 7.5% Imperial Pumpkin Ale. You tend to increase the intellect. The last thing I'll say about a great season is something that I think will call to all sorts of fans, casual, hardcore, stats dudes like us, and everything in between. I've bemoaned on prior podcasts that the vocal leaders in this team have been John Collins and Chris Dunn, who are not the players who you want as your vocal leaders. You want your best players to also be vocal leaders. So you need that to come from somewhere else. And one of the vibes around Keyonte George is, this is a real cocky dude, man. Right? He really thinks he's I'm trying to avoid expletives for algorithm reasons, but yes, that is who he is. Perhaps putting a little bit more ahead of his skill that he's demonstrated. However, if Lowry is not going to be that guy, which by the way, unlike a Rudy Gobert type, Lowry is by all accounts seems to be a little bit more of that player this year after 2 seasons of extremely awesome play and comfort and being in Utah and maybe signing the extension. He has a little bit more FU attitude about it. We'll see what happens in live game action. But Utah could still need that second guy. And even the veteran player like Jordan Clarkson is never going to be that guy. You see where I'm going with this? If Keyonte George can translate that cockiness into, I will follow Keyonte George into the fires of hell because of the belief he has in us and himself, right? And he has the on-court performance to back it up. That will do wonders for the young players on the team, I think, and give Will Hardy a lot of confidence that, like, hey, no, this is a guy that I can trust to. My team spirit is in order when we're losing 53 games.
Yeah, no, I agree. And in fact, I think because of, you call it cockiness, I mean, whatever you call it, like, I think he's closer to having kind of the natural inclination for that version of leadership than like Lowry. We've heard so far in the preseason that Lowry's trying really hard to kind of be that guy and engage that part of his personality, and maybe he will, and that's great. I love Lowry a lot. But like Keyonte probably has to fake it a little less to be like,
it also has to be natural because like Lowry is a terrific basketball player and they will respect the words that come out of his mouth. But these professional athletes have been in all sorts of team environments going back to youth sports. They see through bullcrap. Okay? Like they identify when a guy is trying hard to be a leader. Right? You need to have that natural leadership ability, and Lowry has a lot of it, but not that top level perhaps that we were used to with some of these other players we see in the NBA.
Yeah, makes total sense. So anyway, I think that's a great addition to the kind of what's a good season list. Bad season. What's a bad season for Keyonte for me? Well, first of all, it would be a bad season if we didn't get to see him that much. So again, relieved that it sounds like tonight's little mishap was a relatively minor thing. I haven't heard an estimate yet. Maybe you've seen something I haven't, but mild knee sprain usually means like you're going to miss some time. Maybe he'll miss a week or two. Maybe he'll miss a month. I don't
Look,
know, but it doesn't sound like it's going to be
based on
good.
what we saw, I was just happy we didn't lose an entire season. And one thing I mentioned to you right before we started recording was if we lost an entire season of Keyonte George, that would have put this entire season under a cloud of where are we, right? And if you can get even 30 games, like he's not going to be out for 50 games, but if he has other injuries or whatever, if you got 30 games of Keyonte George, that is enough to say like, okay, where is he right now, right? Because you also had an entire summer league as well, to make assessments on what to do next. So it's not just okay, I'm glad he's healthy or whatever, but if in the moment I immediately thought it's going to make Xanix's job so much harder because we don't know where Keyonte is going to be in April. So I'm just glad that we're going to get even if they're super cautious, Dan, and wait until December, I don't care.
Yeah. And then other things that to me feel like a bad season. And again, I know I keep coming back to this, but it's only because if Keyonte George isn't at some point like a point guard in a somewhat more traditional sense, then he's just another 6'3", 6'4" shooting guard in a point guard's body. And that is probably the most abundant archetype in the league right now. A scoring guard who's 6'4" or 6'3" is like you can swing a dead cat and hit 5 of them. Like the Jazz have a lot of that
Does
on
the
their
cat
roster right
have
now.
to be dead, Dan?
Well, if he's not dead, I kind of feel bad swinging him by the tail. I'm actually
Okay,
trying to
that's
be
also fair.
kinder
Okay,
to the
that's
cat.
fair. That's fair.
Yeah. Okay. Well, you could throw a rock.
There we go.
Okay. No PETA complaints here. Now I'm being mean to humans, but yeah. So anyway, bottom line is, I do think that just stagnation in that part of his game would be kind of not frustrating, but also I think that player. I just think his value in the marketplace, his value to the Jazz looks differently. If you're just like, okay, again, he's middle class man's Anthony Simons, or he's another Jordan Clarkson, which Jordan Clarkson is a good player, and Jordan Clarkson could help a lot of teams when he's playing the right way. But like as the Jazz learned this summer, teams aren't going to, your phone's not going to ring off the hook because you've got a 6'4" guy who can score between 60 and 20 points a game. 16 and 20. Did I say 60? Anyway, you get the point.
Yeah, well, between
small score first guard.
Yeah, and we think of Keyonte, he looks bigger and he plays bigger than perhaps the size. Like when you think like, oh, is he like Anthony Simons? And perhaps the top level thought of Anthony Simons is a small, skinny, poor defending gunner type. Keyonte George isn't that much bigger than Anthony Simons, everybody. He's legit an inch taller and I think maybe like 8 pounds heavier. They are very similar players, and you can expect the same defensively from Keyonte George and Anthony Simons. Dan, I'm worried about Keyonte George's performance when it's in the middle of February, March, April. And we've shut down Lowry. We've shut down Walker. We've traded Clarkson. We've traded John Collins. Knock on wood, perhaps, if depending on your ilk. We'll talk about them in a moment. And all the virtues that I was talking about that surprised me of his passing and his skill level from his rookie season. When you're a rookie, you don't care who's on the court with you. You're trying to learn and prove that like, hey, I belong. And yeah, your rookie scale contract is still several $1 million more than what you or perhaps anyone in your family has ever made, but you see a 9-figure contract in your future if you start actually starting for a professional basketball team. And if he is in March and April and reverting to horrible habits because the lineup that he's playing with is not winning, and no player is trying to lose, obviously. Tanking is an organizational kind of effect of like shutting guys down, that sort of thing. It's not like five guys on the court being like, "Hey guys, can't wait to, go get Friendly's ice cream after the game," right? Like, and we're just going to lose the basketball game. But he can look around and see garbage playing alongside of him being like, "This isn't worth my time tonight. So I'm not going to work on anything. And for my 29 minutes tonight, I'm going to see how many threes I can hit. Or I'm just going to play like Baylor Keyonte George and not try anything. I'm just going to try to score a bunch." He might do awesome at that. He might have incredible scoring nights. But we would walk away. The reason I'm calling this a bad season, regardless of his performance on the court, it was we would walk away from this season not knowing enough about Keyonte George's future. If he plays poorly, he plays poorly, guys. Like, that's not going to be a mystery to me of what a poor Keyonte George season looks like. But if we don't have enough information about what his ceiling is, what his middle tier performance is, and what his floor is as a lead ball handler or even a secondary ball handler, that'll be a bad season for me, because that makes our job so much harder as far as building this team around Lauri Markkanen.
Yeah, that's a fair point. And there is going to come a point in the season at some point where the team is a lot more Keyonte centric. We saw it last year, and it went not always great. Again, to me, so much just comes down to like, knowing the stuff that Will Hardy talked to us about the other night, like just knowing when I want you to hurry it up the court, when I want you to like slow down and let guys get in place before you use your speed and turn on the burners, when I want you to, get into the play with 16 seconds on the shot clock versus 10 on the shot clock. I personally like the starting plays with 10 on the shot clock is probably disproportionately affecting my enjoyment of Keyonte George. That's the one thing that just kind of, it's a pet peeve of mine. It kind of grates on me. Like, just even if all they did was just like run some bullshit fluff action that everyone in the gym knows is not meant to generate anything, just because like one time out of 100, the defender's going to screw up in how he defends the fluff, and you're going to get a wide open backdoor layup from it. Like, just do something like that so that something is happening for the first 2/3 of the shot clock, other than a guy standing out front dribbling the ball.
Well,
but
Dan, I love talking about the philosophical aspect of it, and we've heard for decades about players' penchant towards, if they touch the basketball, they feel better about just being on the court, and they move faster and they care more. I would even go one step behind that, is if you just send some players on some actions and say like, "Look, man, this dummy action or this fluff is not designed to get you the basketball, but the defense might be caught sleeping, and one out of every 15, 20 times you do this, you're going to get an easy slam dunk that is going to be on Sports Center, perhaps." Like, that gets the juices flowing. I fully agree with you, and anytime we have a lazy offense, it's infuriating, because it's just like, let's play some basketball, will you?
just like do something. Yeah. Tonight there was a play. I don't remember who wound up shooting it. It might have been Collins, and I think whoever it was actually missed the shot. So maybe this is a bad play to use it. But there was a play where like Lauri Markkanen does his like come off the double pin down, and then he decides based on what the defense is doing if he's gonna go over both screens or split the screens or whatever. Anyway, he does that, and just like the way it gets started, there's nothing there for Lauri Markkanen. So what does he do? He still runs hard. He still like completes his part of the action, runs hard through the paint, takes two defenders with him, and because of that, whoever came in behind was able to get the ball pretty deep in a pretty good position. Although again, I think whoever it was missed the shot. But that's exactly what I mean. Like, if you're involved in the play, you might not touch the ball, but like you're involved in the play and you can recognize. So anyway, I think we're saying the same thing now. Just do stuff.
And look, as with all of these, we've done two of them. The way they operate, Dan, is that the first player we talk about is a lightning rod. Like, it's a player we have a ton of thoughts about. And we could
Questions.
questions. We have proposed answers, and we know fans have questions and answers about them. And we will go down the line with more or less interesting players. So not a surprise that we spent a lot of time talking about Keyonte George, but I do want to get the next three questions that we'll ask for every player are: what's a lineup you want to see? Do they survive the trade deadline? And do you see this player as a part of the Jazz championship future? And we can run through these quickly for, I think, some players versus others. And for Keyonte, I really want to get your answer specifically on the third question there, which is, or the third of our five questions, which is, what lineup or player or players do you want to see Keyonte playing alongside, and what are you looking for with that?
I mean, obviously, the most long-term relevant thing is just seeing him in Markkanen-centric lineups. But I actually think that there's probably more data in seeing him, play with Lowry sometimes, play with Kessler, a traditional rolling big sometimes, play with John Collins, who can roll or pop. We'll talk about Collins in a minute. I think that Collins, you know, varied approach to the pick and roll game actually makes him kind of interesting in a developmental situation. Um, yeah, I want to see him play with different kinds of bigs. Basically, I'm mostly focused with Keontae. Like, obviously, it would be cool if, like, you've heard me say that I'm kind of intrigued by the idea of what Cody Williams is if he reaches 80% of his best case scenario. Like, that would be cool if Keontae and Cody established some chemistry, whatever. But I think a lot of it comes down to, like, you know, does Keontae's game change noticeably? Does his effectiveness change noticeably if he's playing with Kyle Filipowski versus Drew Eubanks? So I'm just going to say, in general, the bigs.
I'm glad you went in this direction because I'm going to go in the complete opposite direction. I've been wildly intrigued by Will Hardy's guard rotation so far because I do think it's indicative of what he's going to do at least at the start of the season, where Isaiah Collier has been pretty married to Jordan Clarkson, and we've seen Keyonte George and Colin Sexton. And given what you and I, we've been very optimistic about Colin Sexton as well. I think there's some real starter level basketball coming out of Colin Sexton, and I want to see who that is, where it goes. And I don't think it's a significant tier above, but there's more point guardiness to Colin Sexton and his game and what he's doing than even Keyonte George. And Colin Sexton is by no means is a John Stockton disciple. So I don't have an answer to what I want to see out of it, right? Like, that's not something that I'm like, oh, I can't wait to see that guard pick and roll. But when you have two players of this archetype, the last thing you want to see is your turn, my turn, your turn, my turn. Like, no one wants to see that when you have two ball handlers that thrive and pressure defenses when they have the ball in their hands. Ideally, you want to see one of them pressuring the defense and causing them to get out of position, and then the ball moves, and all of a sudden the other ball handler gets the ball, and the defense is a mess. And either Keyonte George or Colin Sexton can easily take advantage of that. That requires each of them to really dive into patience, into passing acumen. That has not been their A level or S tier skill so far in the league. So I want to see that playing together. I want to see that not be a your turn, my turn thing. I want to see how they can evolve together because there's a future for both of them on the team. And to that end, we can skip the trade deadline question because unless something wild happens, Keyonte George will be on the team at the trade deadline. But we've answered the question, will Colin Sexton be part of the next Jazz championship roster or championship playoff contending roster? However you want to take this question. Let me ask you a more direct question. Is there a world in which Keyonte George and Colin Sexton are both part of the next playoff contending roster for the Jazz?
Sure, but I think in that scenario, probably one of them has risen to something other than, fourth or fifth best player on said contender, right? Like if they're, if Keyonte gets to the point I think the version of the Jazz we're gonna see get out of the second round next is probably going to be a version with Lauri Markkanen, Cooper Flagg, or someone from the 2025 draft, and some guy that they go trade for at some point who's already an all-star or a near all-star. And that means if you think that like in most scenarios, Keyonte George probably maxes out as like the fourth best player on the next contending version of the Jazz, or the fifth best player on the next contending version of the Jazz. Which is fine, by the way. Like that's still really like you're going to make a lot of money if you're the fourth or fifth best player on a good NBA team. If he and Colin are somewhere around that same tier in a contending scenario, then I think at some point you probably find better ways to spend that $20 million that it would take to keep one or either one, and you go a different direction, or at some point one of those guys becomes the guy that you put in the trade to get said trade candidate. So I think it's probably less likely unless one of those two guys becomes like almost part of a 3 or 4 man, star core. I
agree. I don't see how both stay as part of the team if you're trying to build this championship roster and what it looks like in the salaries it would require. You'd have to nail the draft a couple times in a row for that to happen. Keyonte George is younger. He's on a rookie scale contract, easier to build around. Will get his restricted rights in a couple years. However, Colin Sexton's contract, based on his extension, and again, extension eligible right now, but he has a fairly reasonable contract going on right now. We'll see how that evolves. So
he's extension eligible until October 22nd.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for always adding the qualifier that is necessary. I'm just indicating and look. Let's be real. If the extension hasn't happened yet, it's probably not going to, because Colin Sexton probably sees a season where he has built upon all the skills that he's developed and says, like, look, man, it's time for me to get a better extension than what is on the table. So you typically don't go into preseason waiting for your extension. The extensions that we saw last week, frankly, some of them were very surprising to me, like Wendell Carter, I thought was much lower than I thought coming in. A lower salary than I expected. But now that we've had a couple preseason games, you typically are not going to see an extension.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think the Jazz want to do one, frankly. I think the Jazz, from an asset management standpoint, the Jazz would rather have the flexibility of, they can still have that conversation with Colin next summer, or depending on how the season plays out, like you can go into February if you catch my thinly veiled drift with, probably more options the other way.
So we have a pair of JC veterans. Dan, I will take your pick on which one you want to start with.
Well, you told me when we were getting ready to go that you have very strong, you used the words very strong opinions on Agent 00, that version of the JC adventure. So I'm so anxious to hear those very strong thoughts that I kind of want to go to JC. Sorry, I shouldn't say JC. But I kind of want to go to Clarkson first and, get at these. Again, since our pattern is to like talk the listeners' ears off on the first two and a half guys and then go into lightning mode, like I want to talk about Jordan.
Jordan Clarkson is so important, in my opinion, to the health of this Jazz season. Excuse my frequent pregnant pauses there, because I want to be careful with the words I said. Jordan Clarkson, I think, has been inappropriately designated as someone who will somehow hurt the tank. Jordan Clarkson's not good at winning basketball anymore, guys. It's fine. It's fine if Jordan Clarkson plays basketball. I think he can help playoff teams based on the skills he does have, in certain roles. But he is not going to... He might accidentally win a game or two for the Jazz. That is not worth worrying about the Jazz win total going into it. Because he could very well, even though he might accidentally win a game or two, he might very much accidentally lose 3 to 7 games but based on poor shooting, and we really don't know where he's at this year. I've long said that perhaps a significant percentage, maybe not a majority percentage, but a significant percentage of his poor play last year was just absolutely being worn down by last summer's FIBA performance, where he was expected to do a whole lot for FIBA play and for the Philippines. And I think he's at the age now where he's the best conditioned player on the team. And I just don't. I think he needs to maintain his body a little bit better, as far as like, okay, what if I don't have my fast twitch guile that I've had my entire career? What am I going to be able to do? And if you're tired, you don't have that. If you don't have your legs, you're not going to shoot well. Shot terribly, turned the ball over a lot. The passing that we saw 2 years ago wasn't there. Whatever. He's not going to help with winning basketball. However, I can promise you, Dan, that if you ask Isaiah Collier to play 20 to 30 minutes a game from game 1 to game 82, he is going to die by game 50. Okay? And if he is completely worn out by game 50, you are getting no practical development from Isaiah Collier or Keyonte George or any other young ball handler. You can even include Johnny Juzang and Jason Preston in that if you want to. You're getting no meaningful development if these guys are completely worn down in March, right? But if you're getting 15 minutes a game from Collier or even 10 minutes a game from Collier, and Keyonte George doesn't have to play 38, 35 minutes. He's playing 28 minutes alongside Sexton and Clarkson and whatever. If you can manage these guys' minutes as young professionals, because you have a guy in Jordan Clarkson that no matter what will always be an innings eater to just play 25 minutes, play 30 minutes, whatever you need out of Jordan Clarkson, he has. If you need Jordan Clarkson to play point guard, not because he's good at it, because we're not trying to win or be good at things, but if you just need Jordan Clarkson to run an offense and move through the actions because he's been in this system for a little bit, that's fine. You can do that. It's important to the health of the entire team that Jordan Clarkson is eating up minutes and just keeping the train on the tracks. I think that is very, very important. And while I have been very vociferous in saying that you need vocal leaders to bring your team through a 50-plus loss season, to keep, like, on the court, you need them to, like, actually go through the actions and move efficiently and give a crap. You also need players like Jordan Clarkson that have been in the league for a long time who like playing basketball. And no matter if it's September, October, November, March, April, whatever, if you tell Jordan Clarkson, hey man, would like you to play some professional basketball today, he's going to say, hell yeah, let's go play, right? And he's always going to have an enthusiasm to playing the game. Look, he bitches on the court a lot. He mopes. He has defensive lapses. I'm not saying he is this Captain America type player, but he's a player that you can always say, can you play some minutes for us and play some basketball? And he's going to do that. His trade value right now is neutral. The Utah Jazz are not getting an asset for Jordan Clarkson. So might as well keep him because he's not helping winning basketball games. So and the objective is to lose, right? Or at least the objective is to not win more accurately. So being able to soak up minutes, being able to keep people's energy happy, not high, but just I'm happy to be around Jordan Clarkson today, right? And the fact that I love his aura, I'm very happy that he is going to be on the Jazz this year. We'll get into whether he survives the trade deadline, but a good season for Jordan Clarkson is not like, oh, he performs great and we trade him, we steal a protected first from some team for Jordan Clarkson. I care about the young players and the young players only, and I care that Isaiah Collier is healthy enough and strong enough to play in March because he wasn't worn down in September, October, etc. I keep mentioning Collier as like a flashpoint for this, but it extends across the entire roster. If Clarkson's on the team, it's not helping the team win, but it is helping the team stay healthy and have their spirits high. Does that make sense?
It does. And I agree with most of that actually. So first of all, to your point about he's not going to help the team win. Dunks and threes has a metric called estimated plus minus that they use to try to approximate someone's value to winning. And based on their calculus, it's just one metric, right? But it usually passes the smell test to me when you look at who's high and who's not so high and whatever. And by that metric, the Jazz's best player last year was Lauri Markkanen, which makes sense, and their second best player was Colin Sexton, which makes sense. And you keep going down the line, like it's a metric that just usually kind of tracks mentally. By that metric, Jordan Clarkson added 0.6 wins to Utah's win total last season. So I think that one, and there are other metrics that would say something similar. I think your logic is sound on like he is not going to derail the tank train. I just mixed metaphors, and they were both modes of transportation, so I feel a little uncomfortable about that. I also agree with the minutes eater thing. And actually, in Clarkson's case, I think it's deeper than just eating minutes. I think he's important because he eats possessions. He's someone capable of taking the pressure off of other guys. You've got, 95 to 105 possessions you got to use every night. And just not everyone is built to use 20 of them. Not everyone wants to, not everyone can. Like some players will spontaneously combust if you need them to do more than, Walker Kessler's gonna finish 5 or 6 pick and rolls a game, and he's gonna get some putbacks. Like that's what you're gonna get in terms of possessions out of Walker Kessler, etc. Taylor Hendricks had 2 straight plays tonight where he kind of created. One was a drive and pass, and one was a drive and keep. And I almost prepared for the second coming because it was the first time in my life.
That drive and keep, by the way, I was like, what is that player? That is something we were not expecting. So I don't know if it was just
who is that?
So color me a little bit, like a little intrigued on that little drive and keep that he had.
Yeah. So, but the fact that it was so rare means that if the Jazz if tomorrow they find trade partners for Clarkson and Collins and Sexton, and you're just expecting 15 possessions a night to get used by Taylor Hendricks, you're going to get some really awkward results. And I don't think it's going to be awkward in a developmentally good way.
Yeah, it might not help Hendricks to do that.
Right. Having someone who just, we talk a lot about sort of this mid-efficiency possession eater. More recently, Jordan Clarkson has not been that. He's been a low-efficiency possession eater. If he can get back to where he's just like using possessions around league average, and taking 15 possessions a game, I do think that just helps the Jazz and helps other guys kind of operate in their more natural role. My only thing, and I guess this is kind of an answer in a way to the what is a bad season question. My only gripe is when it starts to feel like it often does with Jordan, like the Jazz have a version of their offense when Jordan Clarkson is not in the game and a version of their offense when Jordan Clarkson is in the game. That's the only thing I want to veer away from. So far in the preseason, if Jordan Clarkson has touched the ball, he has shot the ball. And again, that's okay. I'm not calling him selfish because sometimes the selfless thing to do for your basketball team is to take the shot. I'm just saying that I want to see a little bit more balance out of him than what we see at times. Obviously, a lot has been made the last couple of seasons about him reinventing himself as an assists guy. I think some of that's overdone. But there have been times when I've felt like he's really balanced in terms of what he's looking to accomplish when he's carving his way into the lane and when he's doing those, slow burn, triple hezzy, change of speed drives, which are great. And they're even more great when 20,000 people in the arena don't know how it's going to end. So that's my only thing with him is I agree with everything you're saying. And I think his presence makes life easier for a bunch of guys who are still learning how to tie their shoes. As long as it doesn't, as long as it doesn't undermine everything else they're trying to do because they just can't run anything, when one guy's pounding the ball into the floor for 14 seconds, which is kind of just a different version of my Keyonte, bad season answer. Keyonte and Jordan look very differently when they take over the possession in that way, but it's sort of the same thing. Like I just want things to flow, and if they're flowing through you and you're taking 23 shots in a game, that's great because it flowed. But I just want things to flow so that guys start to learn their roles in an offense where things flow, if that makes sense. I'm going to say flow some more times and turn that into a drinking game.
Yeah, no, look, my beer is empty, so I can't participate in whatever drinking game you have. I hear you on wanting the flow to be improved. I just don't care. I just don't think Jordan Clarkson will take up enough possessions where that is going to hurt development. It's going to hurt the minutes that he's not on the floor or whatever. Like, if the Jazz were trying to win games, I'd be like, look, man, this is a problem. Like, he's causing problems because it is throwing out everyone else out of rhythm. I think there's going to be enough shoot-around time, practice time, non-Jordan Clarkson minutes time. Jordan Clarkson is resting today because we were in Miami the night before or whatever. That the development will happen. And so I'm not really concerned about, when Jordan Clarkson's on the floor, it all goes to shit. I love what Will Hardy said about Jordan Clarkson as a Collier playing together. I think that makes a lot of sense. Whereas the Sexton, Keyonte minutes are a little bit more like, well, what's really going to happen there? And a bad season is if I'm wrong, Dan, because Jordan Clarkson is not this bubbly quarterback one of a high school varsity football team, right? Like Jordan Clarkson can get surly. Jordan Clarkson can get bummed out. And if the game's not going his way, and he's sitting on the end of the bench, not saying anything, right, and not talking to anybody, that also sends a message to young players as well. And I'm not asking Jordan Clarkson to change that. He is who he is at this point. I'm hoping, and we'll never get to see this like from our fans' perspective, but I'm hoping that there's more positive of having Jordan Clarkson around than not having Jordan Clarkson around. And if having Jordan Clarkson around in a 50-plus loss season is just making everyone feel awful, then yeah, I would trade him for neutral value. And that would be a bad season because I would hate to have what I think has been an overwhelmingly positive Jordan Clarkson experience. Not stats-wise, but I think this entire Jordan Clarkson experience for the Utah Jazz, him choosing Utah, a player of his social stature. By the way, like his girlfriend is a pop punk star, right? Like there's so much to Jordan Clarkson that is not Utah that he chose to re-sign in Utah that means a lot to me personally. And it would be a shame if we traded him away because the vibes sucked. That would be a bad season for me. So whether he will survive the trade deadline or not, I think depends a little bit more transactionally. I'm going to skip the lineup question because I don't think we care about Jordan Clarkson in lineups. But as far as the trade deadline question, I think it depends. I think Zanuck and Ainge will think a little bit more transactionally on this. Is the value there, right? Is there an actual first-round pick or even a bad first-round pick on the table? I don't think Jordan Clarkson's a guy that, you trade him for 3 seconds and be like, that's great. I think he's a guy that you just kind of play at the string.
I don't know. I think the Jazz might trade Jordan Clarkson for 3 seconds. I think the Jazz might trade Jordan Clarkson for a single second and a small salary player who's like mildly interesting.
Yeah, I think even a bad first round pick is off the table at this point entirely, by the way. Like there would have to be like Jordan Clarkson's having a fantastic year and a team is desperate for a ball handler.
Well, or unless it's like, the Clippers need to figure out something to do with PJ Tucker and could use an extra ball handler. So there's maybe a scenario that makes sense where like although their pick situation sucks, so maybe this is the wrong example, but there might be a scenario where you're doing a team a salary favor and they're getting Jordan Clarkson, and so for that you get a first. But I don't think he commands a first on his own as of today. Again, a lot could change based on his play. A lot could change as different teams with different goals start to see how the standings are shaking out. Maybe someone has more urgency closer to February. But I think for me, the answer to the other question we haven't tackled with Jordan answers this one, which is Jordan Clarkson going to be around on the next contending version of the Jazz? And I think this is one of the players who I can most confidently say, no, he's not. He's just not. By the time the Jazz are really ready to contend again, you're going to be talking about a guy who's in his late 30, he'll be 36 by that point or 35. And that's in the best case. Like, that's if the Jazz do a quick rebuild, right? Which there's not even any guarantee of that. So I think if you're relatively confident that this isn't someone who's going to help you the next time you're competitive, then I think that there comes a point where you will salvage whatever value you can salvage from, the situation. So I think it's likely that he's not here the entire season. I'm with you that I think that will hurt the team's climate more than a lot of fans realize. Even fans who kind of agree with me on some of the basketball pet peeve stuff. I can say that stuff bothers me and still say with 100% clarity, I will be sad the day Jordan Clarkson gets traded. I will be sad to watch everything he represents go out the door. But I do think that there is a possibility that he does not make it through the season, because the answer to that other question is almost certainly not.
I've got nothing further to say on Jordan Clarkson, frankly. I adore him. I adore the vibes he brings. He was very important at, I think, keeping together the culture of a very tenuous Gobert and Mitchell era for the Jazz, as was Mike Conley, for sure. And I'm less concerned about the vibes of the team between February and April. Like, that shit never really matters too much. It's more about, okay, if this team is 10-20 or 10-25, right? Like, that is still a period of the season that you want to keep the team caring and trying a little bit, and that's why I care about his presence. But he's here now, and we got to see a little mid-range action from him today, and I like seeing him on the court. I'm glad he's playing. So the other JC, I have less strong, maybe perhaps as strong opinions as Jordan Clarkson, but they're much simpler in John Collins. So after one season of John Collins' experiment in Utah, Dan, what is your idea of a good season for John Collins now that I think everyone would agree was a disappointing season for John Collins last year? He didn't have a great season in Atlanta the year before, but this is a kind of a bet on talent and trying to say, like, okay, well, we saw enough from John Collins at one year where he was almost an all-star. Is there a way that we can reclaim what John Collins' massive, not massive, but a very large contract portends his skill to be? Is there a good season or a great season for you on the table for John Collins that you want to see this year?
Embracing the bench role, just because I do think that the worst version of his season is the season where he's essentially the same player as last year, and he stands in Walker Kessler's way, right? So I think because of that, I'm like, to me, that's kind of a deal breaker. Like, I think the bench thing, unless they want to try playing them together again just for data points. But I do think we're at a point where we need to continue to see Kessler playing big minutes, more minutes than he's going to get if he just exclusively backs up John. I saw you about to say something.
Yeah, no, it's like we see John Collins shooting threes tonight, right? Like, he's ostensibly a floor spacer, but he's not shooting threes at the clip that he once did, right? Like, he had the hand injury or wrist injury or whatever it was that all of a sudden cratered his shooting ability. The reason I'm trying to interject so quickly is just to say that, yeah, man, he got a chance to have a year of clout where he, at a salary structure and where Walker Kessler was in his development and where John Collins' voice was in the locker room, a new guy, big voice, whatever, he got to have a role of starting. And, okay, man, it sucked. Your clout is gone. And it's time to have a great season, where you can show every team in the league that there is a reason you want 20 to 25 minutes of John Collins on your team. Every team in the NBA wants 20 to 25 minutes of John Collins in some respect. Maybe starts, maybe comes off the bench for some teams. But I just got so agitated when he said standing in Walker Kessler's way, because I'm like, yeah, like I'm willing to understand the roster politics of saying like he needed to do that for a year, but I will have no patience for that this year, Dan.
Fair. Um, and I also we talked about him a minute ago how he's kind of problematic positionally, and which is a bummer because I've had Jazz people say to me, and they're not wrong when they say this, by the way, like a 6'9" guy. Is that what he is? He's 6'9" or is he 6'10"? Let's check that. 6'9".
Yeah.
Okay. A 6'9" guy who can do the kinds of things that John Collins can do on paper, who can roll or pop, who can stand in the dunker, stand in the corner, like that is a lot more. That archetype is a lot more difficult to replace than the Jordan Clarkson, I'm an 18-point per game, 6'4" scorer who does little else. Like John Collins, in theory, should be way more interesting than he is right now to the trade market. And I think that the Jazz's hope is that as his contract gets closer to the end, next year he'll be an expiring contract, and there might be a team. I had this debate with Andy Larson one day on Twitter, X, the places that you debate things.
The everything app.
I think
you're supposed to say the everything app.
Okay, I refuse to say. No, I'm just kidding. I think that there is a non-zero chance that this time next summer, or that in the transaction window next summer, or even in February, someone says, just like the Jazz did, hey, if the cost is not really anything meaningful, we'll just take a flyer on John because he's still 26 and he's still 6'9" and he still can do all these things. And I think that's real. The problem is that every time he's on the floor, the opponent knows it, and they just immediately start to lick their lips about how they're going to exploit that. It was kind of obvious tonight. It was more obvious in the Houston preseason game. And this is preseason. Like, who gives a shit? It's the preseason. But, every time Kessler subbed out and Collins subbed in, it was just Alperen Şengün, low post, mid post. Just go to work on this guy because he can't stop you.
Well, both teams have played very differently with how their centers operate. But both Alperen Şengün, well, they also had Steven Adams at a point too, right? In playing in that preseason game. And Steven Adams is more similar to what we saw tonight with Daniel Gafford and Derek Lively, where all four of those centers I just mentioned operate in the paint superlatively compared to most of the NBA. And John Collins does not stand a chance. If it's a diving pick and roll with Derek Lively, you got a Kyrie Irving, Derek Lively pick and roll. John Collins is toast. If you got Alperen Şengün in low post kind of doing his thing, passing, shooting, making a post move, John Collins is toast, right? So then you're expecting John Collins to be like, all right, if we're going to have you at center, can we do some sort of fun switching defense where the opposing offense just is like, I don't know what we're going to do. And if Derek Lively is rolling to the rim, it's not John Collins there. It's John Collins and two other guys who are swarming on him. But the reason that triple team on Derek Lively in the paint rolling to the rim isn't a problem is because we have so many switchable options and Cody Williams and Taylor Hendricks running around the perimeter. John Collins also isn't very good at that kind of role either, nor is the rest of the Jazz team where it makes sense to do that. So this entire fit has been inappropriate, and the things he does well has been inconsistent would be too much praise so far, Dan.
I don't know about that on the things he does well. Like he's a he was probably, in fact, at one point last spring, I looked at this. I looked at there's a math term for this I don't remember right now, but I looked at kind of like the average variance, like how many points he is averaging off of his average. And John Collins was like a guy you could just pencil in for like 14 to 16 points every night, right? So, like that's the things that Collins does well category. I just think that defensively he can't be that degree of a target. And it's not even just the bigs. You mentioned the bigs and like when Alpi Şengün was out of the game against Houston, it was the guards who were just driving right at him. It's like when he checks in, there's a big circle around him that the opposing coach has circled in the atoms around his body and told all of his players, that guy, go drive at that guy. And
when it's a perimeter defender, you can craft defense around that weakness. When it's your 5, when it's your center eligible player, that is so much harder.
Right. And there are ways to get around that, but it almost always involves having another top 30 defender on your basketball team. Like the same has been said about Cat in his career. So what do? They went out and they drafted Jaden McDaniels and put Cat next to Jaden McDaniels. And when it still wasn't working, they went and put Cat next to Rudy Gobert. And then sometimes they would give Cat the assignment where they knew he was going to get his lunch eaten so that Rudy Gobert was a help. So like Cat's guarding.
And they crafted one of the best defenses of all time.
Right. So if the Jazz had that option, then I think I could be more patient with this problem of like he's a 4 on defense, he's a 5 on offense, and because they don't, I don't think I'm as over him as you are. It sounds like your simple but strong feelings about John are just that you're over him. You're ready to be done with the John Collins experiment. Am I misinterpreting?
I'm not done with it, if only because we've seen a few preseason games where he's come off the bench. And as we started this whole thing, speaking optimistically, what is a great season for John Collins? I want to see a future of like the next Jazz contending team to jump to that question, right? If we were thinking about jumping ahead and why we're talking about John Collins, anytime you talk about these veteran players, right, it's like, okay, you obviously are not going to be part of the next Jazz contending team, but how are you going to bridge the gap to get us there? And frankly, John Collins' contract is long enough that he might be here for another couple of years as well. But I'm trying to think of where does John Collins make sense for bridging this gap where we're going to be bad enough. Which, by the way, like Jordan Clarkson, John Collins last year was not good enough to affect winning basketball. Okay? So I'm not worried about John Collins. In fact, blocking Walker Kessler's minutes helps Jazz losing basketball games. So I'm not immediately concerned about that. But if I think about where I love the bet, I really did love the idea of, look, Atlanta's trading him for nothing, right? This is a chance for us to put Lowry with a real quality dude in John Collins and Walker Kessler and really make something here. And it failed. And so now I'm just left questioning, Dan. I don't understand why a 20-minute bench player, John Collins, means something for the 2025 and 2026 Jazz. I understand how it could help the 2024 Jazz. So like the Jordan Clarkson discussion, I think that would be great for the Isaiah Collier minutes. I think it'll be great for the Cody Williams and Taylor Hendricks minutes to play alongside him. And when you've played in the league as long as John Collins has, he's still young, but he's played in the league a long time. There are nuances to pick up and things to enjoy. And he is a vocal leader that people like. It's not like he's this guy that people hate, and I bemoan that. Everyone loved Chris Dunn as a vocal leader, that kind of thing. It's more that I it just makes my heart sink and make me roll my eyes at some of the mistakes that are made. It makes for gross basketball in a way that Jordan Clarkson doesn't bother me. Like, I don't mind it when Jordan Clarkson monopolizes a possession and shoots up a brick. I just don't care. It doesn't matter. But when John Collins is doing something that's like, oh, they just ran right through him like he was nothing. It makes me a little sadder than the Jordan Clarkson discussion, if that makes sense.
I I think it does, but I don't think that those two players are as dissimilar on the macro as you're sounding, and I think that some of it is that Jordan Clarkson has earned through all the flamethrower nights and all of the when the Jazz were good and he was a big part of that, and the sixth man and the splash uncles and all that. I think he has earned our benefit of the doubt, so we don't notice when guys run right around him on defense. Like
I have a huge blind spot for Clarkson. If that wasn't evident from my soliloquy on him, I have a blind spot on Jordan Clarkson. I admit that. I am immediately over John Collins, and I need something about him to draw me back in, and his bench play could do that.
And I guess that's where I'm going. Is almost everything we said earlier about Jordan, I think you could also say about John. For example, both players extremely flawed on defense. Neither player will ever be confused with a player who has heard of defense. Okay. But the same way we were talking about Jordan eating possessions and Jordan taking pressure off guys, like I think it could mean something to Isaiah Collier that for half a season, his pocket passes off the pick and roll are going to go to John Collins instead of going to Drew Eubanks.
That means something. It really does. Yeah.
So that's all I'm saying is that I think if we're giving Jordan this benefit of the doubt of like, yeah, but he might just be an NBA player and a grown up who now the Jazz can play a form of basketball that makes sense and still not be super good. By the way, you mentioned the win map number. Would it surprise you to hear that after Lauri Markkanen and Colin Sexton, John Collins was the third highest Jazz player in that metric I mentioned, just ahead of Walker Kessler? I don't think he's now.
It would stun me if only because the net rating of his lineups were so bad for so long.
Well, it's true. He contributed based on dunks and threes, which is Taylor Snar's metric. Taylor Snar used to be a Jazz employee who did statistical analysis for the Jazz. He contributed 2.5 wins to the Jazz last year, more than anybody other than Markkanen and Sexton. I'm sort of saying that tongue-in-cheekly, Mark, because I don't actually believe that stat. That stat doesn't. It's a box score derived stat, so it because there's not a box score metric for the number of times another player just dunked the ball right on your head because you were essentially made out of paper in the defensive paint. I don't think he was their third best player, but I'm just saying he's a grown up, and a lot of the same things that we said applied to Jordan about just enabling the team to look like an NBA basketball team for a handful of possessions every night is worth something. Is it worth more than, if the Jazz could give away John Collins for free right now, would they give him away for free? I think the answer is yes.
That was going to be my next question is if another team offered the Rudy Gay in a fake second package to Utah, would they take it to get off the money?
I don't even think it's to get off. Well, I mean, his money this year isn't a problem. If you get rid of next year's money, which is a $26 million player option that, let's be clear, John Collins is going to exercise, like that money, you might as well just take the player option today because he's opting into that $26 million.
Which if we want to be, I know you and I think our fortes are being cap dorks and team strategy and that sort of thing. Sometimes if you had John Collins on an expiring contract next year and you have surprises of Keyonte, if the team is suddenly pretty good and you have a team that is worth trading for, you need some fat salaries to trade along with it, right? And maybe John Collins' $26 million next year is more valuable as an expiring salary than trading him this year for nothing.
Absolutely. I mean, all the time you see examples of teams who could probably get a deal done if they had more stackable salary that was attached to players who are non-core, right? Like you get teams like New York or last year's Mavs where it starts to get hard to make deals because everyone who's making kind of a more than the minimum, less than the max salary is someone that is kind of important and you don't want to put in deals. So that could matter. Yeah, the Jazz would give John away if they could. If only because if you do that, you're looking at a scenario where you could go into next offseason with Lauri Markkanen locked up, a top 5 pick in the draft, 6 other guys still on their rookie contracts, and $30 million in cap room. And suddenly you could start to imagine a scenario where the Jazz could restructure their core and change their destiny really fast. But you can't do that unless you move John Collins' $26 million salary. I mean, you can, but it'll take more time to do it. You could go into next offseason, play your cards really right, and be like a 48-win team the following year if you don't have John Collins to pay. So for that reason alone, I think they would. But for as long as he's here, I think the value of him is that Isaiah Collier gets to play pick and roll basketball with a guy who knows what the fuck he's doing, even if he's going to get blown up defensively on every play on the other end.
Yeah. The last thing I'll say on John Collins is exactly alongside those points is he's the best dunker on the team, and we'll get some highlight plays one way or another. And although in the macro sense, I am also perhaps hoping that we have a 54-loss season. But every night that I tune into the Jazz, I can't help myself. I want cool shit to happen. And I like cool things, and I like the Jazz playing well. And if that means that my guy Jason Preston or Isaiah Collier can get up an alley-oop pass to a cool dunk that we can look back on, that'd be kind of cool. That'd be fun, and I'll enjoy it. He seems like a good guy. I really don't have any problems with John Collins, a person. Unlike the Miles Bridges rumors this summer, like I'm happy John Collins is around. I want to see Walker Kessler minutes, and I hope he's not blocking too much. So I know Jordan Clarkson and John Collins were kind of hot button topics, I think, for Jazz fans as they think about, like, are these guys causing us to win too much? Are they blocking minutes for our young guys, which we didn't even get to talk about, I think, kind of our ethos on those young players. Maybe that is perhaps a wider season preview topic we can talk about at another time. But we got 2 remaining players on full NBA contracts. We won't talk about the 2A guys, Jason Preston, Micah Potter, and Oscar Tshiebwe. But I'm sorry, is it Tshiebwe is on a he is our two-way. He is our third 2A. Okay. I was wondering what Tavion Kinsey was, but he was on a 2A, waived and signed to an Exhibit 10. Is that what happened with Kinsey? Okay. I was just
and then waived again.
Correct. Because so
he's G League bound. So
right.
That, which is great.
Right. So I laughed that the Jazz this summer, they posted a Instagram post of a charity event that Tavion Kinsey had, and then 2 hours after they posted that, they waived Kinsey, which in a player in Kinsey's position, you'd much rather be on a 2-way than an Exhibit 10, but he's getting a nice, NBA experience and good NBA money for his experience, but that probably didn't feel great. But we got 2 other players on full contracts, Dan, and one of them is a highly touted, very early second-round pick that most draft analysts pegged as a first-round pick. We talked about, and this is Kyle Filipowski, and we talked about our analysis of his game, who he could be for the Jazz after the draft in a separate podcast. But let's talk about Kyle Filipowski this year and the typical questions. What's a good season for him? What's a bad season for him? What lineup do you perhaps want to see with Kyle Filipowski on the floor? What do you expect from Kyle Filipowski at the trade deadline if he's going to survive that? And do you see Filipowski as part of the next Jazz championship team? I like to kind of lay out all those questions all at once because I feel like at this point in the podcast, you can kind of take either of or any of those questions as however you want to take it. Because after a few preseason games, Dan, I'm not exactly sure what I expect out of Kyle Filipowski this year, if anything.
Yeah, I mean, I think, as long as John is on the roster, I think Filipowski is going to have a hard time finding big minutes. In fact, through his first two preseason games, he almost exclusively played with another big on the floor. So he was essentially the 4 and not the 5. Tonight, he finally saw some minutes where he was, the actual center on the court. That's probably an easier pathway for him to really shine with his NBA skill set. I think the best version of him is someone who doesn't just make threes and is a stretch big, but is actually someone who, like, when the ball finds its way into his hands, he can actually think a little bit with the ball in his hands. He's brought the ball up the court a few times, mostly when just like there wasn't a super obvious outlet pass. But I think he's someone who could be like, again, I don't want to be like unfair to guys with my comps, but like Kelly Olynyk might be like unusually smart at basketball creation for a big man. So I'm not asking him to be that, but like a Kelly Olynyk light is probably Kyle Filipowski's best pathway to being like a 10-year rotation player in the NBA. And so that's I guess kind of my answer to the what is a good season question is just that when he's on the court, he's not just standing in the corner. He's a little bit more involved. He's facilitating, even if it's just punishing a bad closeout or doing second side stuff. I would like to see him as the screener more often so that he's actually involved in the play, which basically means I'm asking to see him play, in lineups that mostly feature 4 perimeter players. And then there was one other comment I was going to make on lineups, and I have lost it. So what are your thoughts while I see if I ever get that thought back?
Well, I think it's a common thread to think about Filipowski as like, well, he's got this passing ability and he's got this shooting ability, and that's going to be his real traits in the NBA. But I don't think Filipowski is going to even have a chance at showing off any of that if he doesn't get way tougher, stronger, and his rebounding improves. And because you can't see the floor in his position and his role. I'm not even talking about defense. You can kind of craft around a bad defensive 4-5 player if he has the shooting and the passing skills. Okay, there's a way to go around that. You cannot see the floor if you do not have the ability to set NBA level screens, and you do not have NBA level toughness, and you do not have NBA level rebounding for a 7-footer. There needs to be more brought into that, and that is not something he can do right now in October. And I'm not expecting it in November, December. I'm hoping that an extended G League time for him teaches him that, yes, you are never going to be the best player on an NBA team, ever, right? Of course, I'll eat my words in 9 years. In that case, the Jazz will have won an NBA title if Filipowski is the best player on the Jazz or whatever. Or maybe the Jazz will win 3 games that year. It's one or the other. But at Duke, a lot of the reason we saw a lot of the shooting and passing and what have you is in part because he was the best player on the team, and we need to give him the ball and make Duke work, right? That is how this offense is going to flow. And just seeing him kind of stand around the perimeter jacking up shots is I don't know, man. That doesn't seem interesting to me. If he is going to explore this passing ability, if he's going to explore some of this other ceiling height level of skill that you want him on the floor, it's got to add so much more to his game of learning how to play in the NBA. So when we get into the February, March, April games where he is definitely going to play because Collins is traded or we're shutting Markkanen down and he's seeing the floor, I don't want to see him just slipping screens at the slightest sense of contact, right? I want to see him running an actual pick and roll with a teammate like Isaiah Collier where they're learning the NBA game together. And maybe they really screw it up, but the screen was good. Or maybe Collier's pass was really good and Filipowski flubbed it. The skills that Filipowski has seem more like if he is a player playing along four players who are way worse than him, or if he is by far and away the worst player playing alongside four amazing players and we need Filipowski to do kind of specific things on the court. A good season for me is we get into March and April and we're seeing a well-rounded big man rather than a curio.
Sure. And we're talking here based on preseason minutes. I'm assuming that right now today, in Will Hardy's written in pencil, could change any minute rotation, I think Kyle Filipowski is this team's 12th man today. And even that is probably artificially buoyed up by the fact that he's 20 and Drew Eubanks is 26 or whatever he is. And that the Jazz used a near first round pick on Filipowski and they didn't on Eubanks or Svi. So, in a vacuum, I think probably if we were at the YMCA right now picking teams, Svi and Drew Eubanks probably get picked over Kyle. So he's the 12th man, but kind of not really the 12th man. He's kind of artificially the 12th. So it's hard for me to get deeper than that, but I do think that his path to real minutes is, number one, if Collins gets traded, or if Kessler gets traded. But we've already said I think that noise was totally overblown, and that the Jazz actually have not none, but very little interest to explore Walker Kessler trade scenarios. If John gets traded, I think Filipowski gets to hear his name called a little bit more. Outside of that, I think really, his path to minutes is all the things that you and I said, and because of that, it's hard to even say what a bad season would be. A bad season, he's probably going to have a bad season, and that's going to be a good season because when you're the 32nd pick, just hanging around is a decent season.
Well, I think I've only one comment on a bad season, and that's if he is entirely unplayable in any sort of defensive scheme, right? Where you have to play him at the 4 because he is abhorrent at defending in a drop or whatever sort of scheme you want to do. We know he's not going to be the world's best defender, but can he be playable in a certain scheme in his rookie season? If he's unplayable, I don't see that ever improving, and now you have a real problem on your hands. So that's kind of my bad level potential. But I think I've kind of spoke negatively about him in this podcast. I just want to say, I think it was a steal of a pick. He's got so many cool skills that are very worth exploring. I'm looking forward to seeing his G League minutes and what happens in April. And hopefully when he is playing in March and April, there are some other young guys he's playing alongside. So which
leaves us one guy.
We have one guy left, Dan, and that is it feels like every single one of the veteran guys that Jazz signed this off, and it was just like a surprise out of nowhere. But unlike a Royce O'Neal or a Joe Ingles, they've all been guys we've heard of. And we've done the Patty Mills, we've done the Drew Eubanks. Now we have Svi Mykhailiuk, who, if I didn't routinely delete all of my tweets, Dan, I probably have about 12 tweets over the past 5 years, whatever, being like, kind of like the Svi Mykhailiuk guy. And he has a ring with the Celtics, as the 15th guy on the roster last year. Got one of these weird Utah offseason deals where he got a whole bunch of years and non-guaranteed money for signing with Utah this year to lose a bunch of games. But I can't help myself, Dan. 6'6" shooter. What's not to like?
Yeah, I mean, he looks like an NBA player. 40% from three the last 2 seasons after struggling a bit. But when you talk about struggling a bit, we're talking about 39 games with the Lakers, 59 games more than that, almost 100 games with Detroit over parts of 3 seasons. I think they had a coach change in that window too. So you're playing. That's his longest stop in the NBA so
I
far,
mean, if
and
it's
even that was
Detroit, they
actually
probably
split
had
up.
7 coaching changes in 3 years.
Yeah, right. And then 30 games with OKC, 50 games with Toronto, 13 games with New York, 19 games with Charlotte, 41 games with Boston. So, 7 NBA teams. His career has been disjointed to say the least. He's never really been part of like any one sort of basketball philosophy for more than a few dozen games. Um, so I think if you're optimistic about Svi Mykhailiuk, it's because you believe in 6, 7 guys who can theoretically shoot the basketball, and you go, why not have that guy as our 14th man? Again, based on how preseason minutes have been doled out, I assume that there are 14 guys or there are 13 guys he's definitely behind because we haven't seen Svi yet in preseason. We also haven't seen Patty Mills. Patty Mills is supposed to be here to be a merit badge counselor, so
you keep saying that, and it keeps making me laugh. The merit badge counselor.
So one of those guys is 14 on, again, Will Hardy's whiteboard rotation list, and one of the guys is 15. So because of that, I'm not going to spend too many brain cells at this late hour thinking about how to make Svi relevant. But I do think that there is a world where, one of these other wing types. The Jazz, by the way, still kind of don't have small forwards on this roster.
Correct.
They have
Correct.
guys. They have Sensabaugh, who they kind of use that way. Johnny Juzang is probably the closest thing to like a traditional small forward. Cody Williams, I think I'm more intrigued about Cody Williams as a 2 than as a 3. But if he beefs up a little, he could be just kind of an all-purpose, decent-sized wing. So
who has been guarding point guards in the preseason? Like they're deploying him as guarding ball handlers instead of some sort of like small forward rebounding type.
Which again, I love. I like that's what intrigues me about Cody. So anyway, for all those reasons, like there's a world in which, Bryce Sensabaugh underwhelms, or they move off, they move away from someone like they did with Ochai Agbaji in his second season, and then you're just like, I don't know, let's try Svi at the 3 because he's 6'7" and has a big body and has been around the NBA for a minute. But I don't. But even if that happens, my expectations for him are like not crapping his pants. Like I'm not as excited about him as you are, but I get why. I get why having him there, at least in theory, makes Bryce Sensabaugh have to work a little bit harder for his minutes. And maybe that's the value.
To be clear, Dan Clayton, I used to be excited about Svi Mykhailiuk.
Okay.
I am not. I am no longer excited about Mykhailiuk. Could be. By the way, all those teams I remember him playing for, I do not have any recollection of him playing for the Oklahoma City Thunder. So that is lost to memory. All I'm hoping was Mykhailiuk, and I think this is perhaps if I'm trying to guess with no knowledge why he was signed. Also, by the way, Mykhailiuk is not going to block minutes for Cody Williams. Okay? Svi Mykhailiuk is not going to affect winning. He's not going to affect the Jazz's pursuit at losing 50-plus basketball games. And if Mykhailiuk plays for 15 minutes a game or for 15 minutes one night, and on that same night Cody Williams only plays for 22, it is not cause for alarm. Please do not worry about that. However, I think that in signing a guy like Svi Mykhailiuk, 6'6" shooter, small forward type, when you get into these February, March, April games and you need to have some sort of theory of the lineup, and you're teaching Collier how to play basketball, you're teaching Keyonte George how to play basketball, you're teaching Cody Williams where to be and what to do, whatever. You could have a random G League or less quality talent on the roster who can't shoot. Or you can have a professional basketball player who shoots 40% from 3 and do small forward things and just say, look, that guy's going to be in this place at this time. He knows how to operate. That's going to help the young guys. All any fan should care about is how do the young players develop. Not how many minutes to play, but how they develop. And having guys like Mills and Mykhailiuk on the team, I think really, really, really help with that, because there's no reason to have a Joe Ingles signing or a Fontecchio signing or a O'Neal signing if you're not if you have no need to throw darts at whatever to figure it out. When you have a playoff contending
To be
team,
clear, you mean a Simone or a Joe Ingles or a Royce O'Neal signing early in their careers when they were unknown.
yes, like if I immediately was dismayed at signing Mills and Mykhailiuk because I'm like, look, what do you got to lose? Sign somebody we haven't heard of before that might be, because I don't follow every professional league in the world or whatever. Sign some guy that might have a chance at making a difference on this team or whatever. And then I realized, like, the reason you sign guys like Fontecchio, O'Neal, Ingles, whatever, is you have your roster that is ready to contend, and you don't have many avenues, roster construction wise, to get extra juice, so you have to take these big swings. Right now, the Jazz have so many young players who don't know how to play. And it just doing this Brooklyn Nets thing or any other or the Wizards thing, and the Wizards actually have some fairly competent players, I think, on their team to help the young guys improve. I think I got more on board with having adults in the room like Mykhailiuk and Mills to help coach some of this stuff along. So maybe Mykhailiuk isn't quite at his merit badge counselor era yet, but I'm not worried about him playing minutes. I'm not worried about him blocking minutes. But who knows if he shoots 40% from three again? Look, we got him on a weird non-guaranteed contract for a couple years. He might stick around longer than just this year. So, Dan, I know we spent a long time talking about Keyonte George in particular, which I think was worth it. But we have now spent nearly 5 hours talking about 15 Utah Jazz full contract players. I've left this series feeling so excited about these individual players. Maybe we'll do some season general stuff to talk about soon. But these individual players, there's stuff that even if the Jazz are not going to make the playoffs this year, I hope that fans are leaving these conversations thinking like, you know what? I will tune out on this random Tuesday night that the Utah Hockey Club is not playing and see what Isaiah Collier's up to. See what Lauri Markkanen's doing. I really hope that we gave them something like that.
Yeah, me too. Because as I've said almost every year since the blow-up trades, like this is actually a really fun time to follow an NBA team. Like, it seems counterintuitive, but I have long felt, maybe this is, a combination of my Jazz fandom and, I'm like a casual Utah Utes football fan when they're good. And, generally speaking, I think that there's a direct but inverse relationship between a team's expectations and their fans' enjoyment. Like, there's a point at which, every win is just like, oh, yeah, they should have won that. Of course they won that. And every loss is a disaster and the sky is falling. And we get to live at the opposite end of that spectrum for the next 82 games where it's just like, it's all just low expectations, play with house money, see who develops, see who does interesting stuff. And then when the Jazz are good in 3 years, 5 years, 2 years, 4 years, whatever it is, we get to be the ones who say, yeah, I remember when Cody Williams was still learning how to make that move on the basketball court that he just made in, the second round of the playoffs. So it'll be fun for all the reasons we've talked about. Some of these guys will pan out. Some of these guys won't pan out. That's part of the thing. That's part of the fun is figuring out what's going to happen. So thanks for convincing me to. I shouldn't say convincing. That makes it sound like my arm was twisted here. Thanks for suggesting that we do this. For spending so much time with me over the last couple of weeks to get ourselves excited about, the 15th man and the 11th man and the 7th man on the roster of a basketball team that's probably going to win 27 games.
Well, yeah, the last thing I'll say tonight, Dan, is as anyone who leaves this podcast thinking is like checking out Salt City Hoops and for the whole season for podcast content and such, because I think we'll be checking in on these players all season long. That's what I really hope to be doing this year.
Yep. All right. Well, that's Mark Pereira. I'm Dan Clayton. This has been a Salt City Hoops podcast. We have a whole lot more coming as the season gets underway. Thanks for joining us. Let's go have some fun.